السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. الحمد لله الحمد لله الكبير المتعال ذي العزة والجبروت والجلال، له الحمد في الأولى والآخرة وله الحكم وإليه المرد والمآل. ونشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له، ونشهد أن سيدنا ونبينا ومولانا محمدا عبد الله ورسوله طيب الخصال صادق الفعال، صلوات الله وسلامه عليه وعلى أصحابه وأزواجه والآل. أما بعد، فأعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. إن الله لا يغير ما بقوم حتى يغيروا ما بأنفسهم. صدق الله العظيم. Honorable scholars, respected brothers, as we sit here at the time of Jumu'ah in the month of Ramadan, having just experienced the 27th night, and prior to that, many nights of Ramadan, we ought to be very grateful to Allah. There are many that were with us last year that are not with us this year. But who knows if we will see next year? Like we talk about those who were with us last year and who are not here this year, it could be possible others would be talking about us next year. So we should sit here with very grateful hearts, and we should be very happy that Allah has given us this opportunity. And we should be very confident that inshallah Allah will accept. Now usually, as Ramadan draws to a close, the apt topic of discussion would be on istiqamah, remaining steadfast after the month of Ramadan, sustaining the spiritual blessings that we have accumulated and achieved during the great month throughout the year. Not being Ramadan Muslims, not being seasonal Muslims, but worshipping Allah every day. Like Ali radiallahu anhu used to say, that those of you who worship Ramadan, it's gone. Those of you who worshipped Allah, He was there, He is there, will always be there. However, I'm sure that many of the scholars will be giving you that very important and apt reminder. In recent days and weeks, I've been taking a slightly different outlook to what I'm speaking on, and I'll explain to you the rationale. When I was here a couple of weeks ago for the Seerah Jalsa, I made mention of one thing, that half the world is oppressed, the other half is depressed. That we all accept. We know what our problems are in this country. We know what our problems are as an ummah, and we know what are the problems of humanity. On top of that, each individual, each family, each business, each community has its own issues. But what do we do about it? That's the more important question. What do we do about it? And how does Ramadan play a part? Now, I have always been a firm believer that in the first step to a solution is to properly diagnose the problem. And that's where many of us falter. We haven't had a decent conversation on what's the nature of the problem. We haven't tried to holistically understand what the issues are, and then we all have our theories and we have our views. You go to any typical Muslim function, wedding, walima, you stand outside a masjid, outside a janazah. What are we talking about? We're talking about our problems, and each one is giving his individual viewpoint on what the solutions could be. And sometimes you listen to some of us talk, you'll say, wow, this guy is like a political analyst. Sounds like a philosopher. He's got the answers to everything. But yet, we are where we are. We are where we are. Why? Because we see Ramadan, we see Hajj as only an opportunity to be more spiritual within a period of time and to earn reward. That's it. We don't look at it from the lens that let's take the momentum of what we generated in Ramadan and try and ensure individual transformation. And then try and ensure collective transformation. Because until the individual doesn't change, the collective won't change. And that's another important point I've been making quite often since October 7th. That change doesn't happen from the top down, it happens from the bottom up. I have to change, you have to change, we have to change. Then communities will change, societies will change. Then only will the ummah change. Now, coming back to the point, you've got to adequately and comprehensively discuss the problem, analyze the problem, assess the problem before you can start talking about solutions. And that is what I want to unpack for you this afternoon. It's been on my mind and it's been coming through in my talks in recent weeks. And I felt that in the last Ramadan or the last Friday in Ramadan, it would be apt for us to do an analysis of the state of Muslims in South Africa. I can't in half an hour give you all the solutions comprehensively. One. Two, this is my assessment. You don't necessarily have to agree with it. Three, this is work in progress. It's not an exhaustive list. There are many important things that I may have missed out. And you will engage me at the appropriate time in the appropriate way and help me to add to it and to amend it and to adjust it. But we have to start the conversation. The conversation may not be perfect, but we've got to start it. So it's a little bit unconventional, but I'm going to do a SWOT. We're all familiar with the SWOT, right? Of the Muslim community in South Africa in the time that has been allocated to me. All the dynamics may not necessarily fit in your province because they say Cape Town is like another country in many ways and for many different reasons. So Haji Sahib from Rustenburg and the other one from Durban and Haji Sahib from Westville will tell you about those differences. But we're all part of one country. So some of these things may be more prevalent in other parts and some of it may be more prevalent, but we talk holistically. The world is now a village. Even if you don't experience it, you hear about it because we live in the same country. If we know about what people are experiencing in other parts of the world, we surely know what people are experiencing in other parts of our country. So let's start with the strengths. What are the strengths? In the main, in passing, I don't have the time to go into all of the details. You know, when you go abroad, that's when you get a sense of what people appreciate about Muslims and Islam in South Africa. When you're in it, you don't sense it. Sometimes you're driving a nice car and you don't realize until somebody says, hey, this is a nice car. Because he's got an outsider's perspective. They come to your house and say, what a lovely color paint you got on your house. It's like, yeah, my wife chose it, but I haven't even thought about it. But now that you mention it, it's actually looking nice. So you know what is the one thing that people appreciate about South Africa is when our forebears came to this country, whether it be in the Cape, which goes back 100 years, or whether it be in the north where I come from, where the history is much shorter, they got the fundamentals right. Wherever they settled, they made sure they established a masjid and they established Islamic education. And via those two things, they preserved the identity of Muslims. Now, if you compare that, right, Muslims who came to South Africa of Malay origin, historically, Muslims who came to South Africa of Indian origin, in the main, over the last centuries, you don't hear about wholesale apostasy. Why? Because the foundation was strong. Arabs who went to the South Americas, decades later were only Muslim in name. What was the critical mistake? The foundation wasn't strong. So we owe that to our forebears, that they set a solid foundation and we are still benefiting from that foundation up to today. The religious infrastructure that they built. Another achievement of the South African Muslim community historically is we didn't say, okay, so the first generation that came, they put in place the masjids, they put in place in the madrasas, the educational structure, so that's it, it's enough. We built on it. So from Maktab, we went to Muslim schools. We developed from, okay, yeah, it may have been different, but in the north, initially the whole Maktab curriculum was in Urdu. It was developed into English. But it was developed so well into English that up till now, the South African curricula are being used in all other countries, even Muslim majority countries, and they've translated it into different languages. So we grew and we evolved. Da'wah and Tabligh has a rich history in South Africa. And it became the bloodline of the entire movement to preserve the faith of Muslims throughout the country. Over time, prominent mashayikh came in the field of tasawwuf, dhikr, spiritual reformation. And they then had disciples here, who then had disciples here. And that branch not only got established, but it flourished. It flourished in South Africa. We then set up our own Darul Ulooms. So we no longer then were dependent on scholars who had to come from other countries, and then there was a language barrier. There was a cultural barrier. And so successful were the Darul Ulooms that were established in South Africa that we are now supplying scholars to all parts of the world. Not too long ago, one masjid would have one alim. Now one masjid has multiple ulama. And that can only be an asset for the community. If you look at halal certification, the South African standard is recognized worldwide. We have something unique, amazing. One unified hilal sighting. I've just come back from the UK, trust me. When you've got multiple moon sightings, your father is making Eid, your father-in-law is not making Eid. Ye had a problem, man. So my friend says, can I make two Eids then? One with my father and another one with my father-in-law. These are things we take it for granted, my generation, because we just got it on the platter. Different schools of thought, different ideological groupings unifying, leaving their other differences aside and saying, we'll give you one verdict. So we don't have that kind of issue in our country. Another thing, when you go to first world Muslim countries, the Muslim media is totally controlled by the state. Even the mimbars are controlled by the state. The imam has to give an endorsed lecture. Many times it's written out for him. He's just going to read it. So you would have Muslim radio stations, for example, but they can't say anything independently. They just go to echo whatever they've been told to say. Then you go to other Muslim, major, first world countries where Muslims are in minority, they don't get licenses to have their own independent media. Then you appreciate what you have in South Africa. You have not one but multiple Muslim media outlets, and they can speak freely, they can speak independently, they can have conversation, they can have robust debate. And that is another achievement. When I was in the UK now recently, they were telling me, if you want to buy a house, it's significantly more expensive if you do it through Islamic finance. And I told him, but in South Africa, almost all of the major banks have an Islamic finance component. Forget the banks that are Islamic from the get-go. Even the major conventional banks have got the Islamic portal. On your app, you can choose that everything of mine must be Islamic. My car finance, my house finance, my investments, everything. And there isn't, to the best of my knowledge, any significant added costs if you were to choose the Islamic option over the conventional option. Then we've got our bodies, be it the Jamiats, the MJCs, the Sanzavs, the Awqafs. They have done a tremendous amount of khidmah. And I'm just mentioning a few names in passing. Obviously, it's not an exhaustive list. We've got in South Africa, which is unparalleled in many parts of the world, for a Muslim minority community to have an umbrella structure. Like you've got the United Ulama Council of South Africa that can convene one united verdict on the sighting of moon. And we owe a lot of this to, yes, our forebears who came in with the right attitude. Some of them were brought here as political prisoners, others came for trade, but they were Muslim first. They didn't say, you know what, I came here as a prisoner, so I deal with whatever is given to me. They made effort, they made sacrifice. Those who came for trade, they made money, but they didn't forget that they were Muslim first, and they established the infrastructure. Together with that, we owe the liberation struggle, the religious freedom that has allowed us to develop all of this infrastructure and put it into place and flourish as a community. Why is it that as a small Muslim community, our advocacy and our activism is the envy of the entire Muslim and peace-loving non-Muslim world? It's because of our forefathers having participated in the liberation struggle. The South African hospitality is renowned. Nobody visits South Africa without picking up a few kilos of weight before they return. But our generosity is also renowned. There is no disaster area, no relief area in the world where South African money doesn't go. And the same within our own borders. So in short, we have a good reputation within our borders and internationally. We are a strong Muslim community. That's the strengths. Now let's talk about some of the weaknesses. Foremost on my list, historically one of the biggest shortcomings has been, in my opinion, we haven't adequately done da'wah to the indigenous communities of this country. And they are ripe in terms of their readiness to accept Islam. And if you look at the demographic, it's still heavily Malay and Indian, or otherwise those who have come in from outside and now reside in our country. That's been a massive shortcoming. We also still, because of the legacy of apartheid, have a lager mentality. Apartheid pushed us into Indian areas and colored areas, so we became very insular. And we were socially conditioned like that. And we haven't managed to break those shackles. We forget that this country is shrinking because of digitization. The globe has shrunk. Areas are becoming now cosmopolitan. The dynamics are very different, but we still think and we approach things in a very insular, in a very lager kind of thing. One major weakness we have is that we've put up all this infrastructure, but we don't have adequate sustainability to look after the existing infrastructure. Many of the existing organizations are at a stretch. Then there is inadequate civic involvement. Yes, we are in our organizations, we are in our businesses, we are in our professions. But how much of time and how many of us are going into civil service? The reality of the world is no one will look after your interest, you have to look after your own interest. And if you don't have a seat at the table, then you are compromised in a major way. That's one thing. The other thing is when you are in civil service, then you fulfill the mandate, أُخْرِجَتْ لِلنَّاسِ, that you have been taken out for people, you have been taken out for mankind. Right now, we have poor political representation. You know, I don't know exact numbers, but we probably have fewer Muslim MPs than we had Muslims in cabinet at one stage. And that can't be healthy. That can't be healthy. Because then it means you don't have adequate political clout. And in any country, you need political clout. When you had political clout, then you had the freedom to do all of those things which I've listed under the strengths. I don't know how much of the issue this is in the Cape, but up north it's a big issue. Over-concentration in certain professions. We're not diversifying in terms of the career paths that the youth are taking. Just because in my family there's a tradition of studying medicine, so I'll study medicine and my son will study medicine and my grandson will study medicine, the dynamics of the world are changing. In Lenasia, there's an oversubscription of doctors. Doctors can't open surgeries, there isn't a demand. So that is something that has become a weakness. Succession planning is also a weakness. Both ways. Normally when we talk about succession planning, we only blame the elders. Yeah, they are holding very fast there, they don't want to give up. That is a problem. But then also, our youth have become very materialistic. They don't want to give time to the community. So there isn't that adequate flow from the bottom up. There is also under a weakness I've listed, there are youth programs, there are youth projects, but there's a lack of adequate structured involvement of the youth. Structured involvement of the youth, where there's a kind of synergized process of handing over from the seniors to the juniors. So those are some of the weaknesses. Again, I say it's not an exhaustive list. And you don't have to agree with everything that I'm saying. I'm initiating a discussion. It's food for thought. Then after that, you take it further. But I feel the time has come that we can't only look at Ramadan from a spiritual lens. What do we do with all the spiritual energy that we have generated? We've got to look now a bit at a bigger picture. So following the SWOT format, what are the threats? This one will get my name publicized in the wrong publications. But the rise of ideological extremism on both ends of the spectrum. So as globalization hits us, we're finding those brothers who want to become more puritanical than is necessary and than is pragmatic. On the other hand, in order to assimilate, in order to appease, on very sensitive matters of aqeedah, we are diluting our Islamic position. Just so that we can appease the kind of rise of modernism and anti-religion that has become prevalent in society. And that's a big threat to the Muslim community. Both ways. Because what happens then? And we sing it, maybe not so much in the Cape, but more in other parts of our country, cancel culture is becoming prevalent. I always say this, the great jurists like Imam Abu Hanifa, Imam Shafi'i, they used to say, رَأْيُنَا صَحِيح يَحْتَمِلُ الْخَطَأ. My view is correct with the possibility of being incorrect. And the opposing view is incorrect, in my opinion, with the possibility of being correct. You see, when I say ideological extremism, what I mean is this. My view is right, not full stop, 10 exclamation marks. There can be no discussion on subsidiary issues. And what we do for purposes of convenience, we elevate a subsidiary issue to a principal issue, then to argue and say, right, there can be no difference of opinion now. Because it's not a subsidiary issue, it's a principal issue. And this is fracturing the community at the bottom. Cancel culture. You can't read namaz behind that one. That one is out of the fold of Islam. That one like this. Don't read in his masjid. Don't go to his program. So we sit here, right? My words are going to be a little bit harsh, but I feel strongly about it. We sit here in judgment of the global political leaders and calling them out for their hypocrisy, that they're not unifying the ummah, but we further fracturing the ummah at ground level. And unity doesn't happen from the top down, it happens from the bottom up. You can't forgive your brother over an inheritance dispute. You don't want to let go of your grudge with your neighbor. In one masjid, which is a place of congregation, which is meant to unify hearts, you're fighting over air cons and windows and all other petty things, right? Then we don't talk about who's creating this unity. My opinion is right, exclamation mark. And I am then rigid and obstinate and I dig in my heels. And that fractures the ummah at the bottom. But then I'm not guilty of leading towards further divisions in the ummah. So I see that as a threat. What we then do is when there is no need, we start rival organizations. So I don't get along with this masjid, I go down the round, build another masjid. As an alim, if I'm working in a madrasa, I don't get along with the principal, I leave, now I'll make sure, I have to fix him up. Start my own madrasa. And who carries the burden? The business community. We have niche areas which we have not touched, which require resources. Then we have existing infrastructure that has a 50 and 100-year legacy that requires resources. The resources are not adequate, but we're putting up new projects because people are driven by emotion. You tell a person, give towards the running expenses of an existing masjid, he's reluctant. Tell him, give money for a new masjid, he'll give wholeheartedly. Give for a new madrasa, he'll give wholeheartedly. Another major threat is the rise of the materialistic lifestyle. A couple of generations ago, our forefathers were poor. It was a struggle to put food on the table. In the main, right? Now in the main, we are a rich Muslim community. In the main. If you have to average it out. Look at our weddings. Don't take my word for it. Go do a costing of the shoes in the shoe rack in any masjid. Then you'll tell me whether you agree with me or this. Every person feels he's poor. Even the millionaire feels he's poor because he's comparing himself to the billionaire. And the billionaire is comparing himself to the trillionaire. And the trillionaire Musk is still not happy because he wants to be the richest man ever recorded in history. And Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam said, وَلَن يَمْلَأَ أَفَاهُ إِلَّا التُّرَابِ. It's only when you die that your greed will come to an end. So each man will say, I'm poor, relative to his hopes, his aspirations, his greed and his desires. But the fact of the matter is, on the whole, we're becoming very materialistic. And we're losing perspective and focus on what we ought to be prioritizing in our lives. When you go for collection and the person says, I don't have, he's not, he's lying. He doesn't have because his list of wants are so hefty. When you went to his great-grandfather, he only had a list of needs, and then the rest was for charity. A little bit here and there for once. This man is trying to live such a lifestyle that even though he's earning in the 6 digits, he doesn't have. He's right, he's not lying. He doesn't have in comparison, in relation to that budget of his. And that, it's not only about contribution. Materialism doesn't only affect, how much charity you're going to give. We are still a very charitable community, right? But it affects our overall approach to life. This bling culture it's eating away at the moral fiber of not only the youth, but even our women folk and even our adults and even our seniors now who know all about YouTube and Instagram. You're looking at the best 5% of somebody else's life and you're comparing it to the best 95% of your life. And it's a very skewed perspective that you get. And then you think, well, that's the life that I need to live. Another problem is this growing, unnecessary, disproportionate, I'm choosing my words carefully, this growing, unnecessary, disproportionate lack of trust in leadership. Leadership is not perfect. And leadership is a reflection of who we are. I'm not saying it, Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam said it, أَعْمَالُكُمْ عُمَّالُكُمْ. Your leaders will be a reflection of your own action, your own spiritual standing in front of Allah. So Umar radiallahu anh says, and I often quote this, he said it a very interesting statement in his inaugural address when he became Amir al-Mu'mineen. He said, "O people, Allah will test me through you and Allah will test you through me." Now it seems like a very simple statement, but it's very deep. What he was saying is this: I'm not perfect. So at times my leadership will be a test for you as the followers. But many times you, because you're not perfect, will be a test for me. So we have to help each other. Now no one is saying that you must give your leaders a free pass. No. But we misrepresent things. People will say, "Maulana, that lady, she stood up in front of Umar and she said, 'Umar, how dare you,' while he was on the mimbar. I don't have the time to explain to you the details of it, but that's taken totally out of context. See, if your leaders do something wrong, they are your fathers. When your father does something wrong, do you correct him like how you correct the man on the street? That's not Islamic culture. So we have started to ape the Western culture. We build people even before they're ready. We build them. Then we take absolute delight and relish in dropping them and breaking them and canceling them, just like the West does. Today's hero, we make him tomorrow's zero. But we don't realize what's happening. We want the youth to grow up and lead, but they need real role models. Ask any youngster who plays cricket, why you play cricket? I have a role model. Why you went into business? I have a role model. So who's going to be the role model in terms of community leadership if this is how we treat our leaders? There are manners and there are methods in which you constructively engage and correct your leadership. Not via WhatsApp. Not via WhatsApp. Another threat is this moan fest culture, where we just complain all the time. Hardly would you find an informal gathering of Muslims where anyone is talking in a solution-orientated way. And I bet you my bottom dollar. Open any book of Sirah and show me a moan fest where they were just sitting and complaining. But at the worst of times, they were futuristic. At the worst of times, they were thinking strategically and in a solution-orientated way. Another threat is, as a community, within the parameters of Sharia, we have not created space for our women to play a constructive role. I spoke earlier on about the youth. I speak now about the women. Another threat, we don't have enough community workers. I alluded to that earlier on. Our forebears were more in trade. The current generation is more in professions. Your shelf life in the professional environment is shorter. The materialistic standards are higher. Professionals are under a lot of pressure. But that's come at a cost to the community. Fewer people are willing to pull their shoulders to the wheel. Because community work is a thankless task. It's easy to be ready, but the difficult thing is to stay ready once you hear the criticism and once you hear the comments. I also feel that we've got Islamic educational infrastructure, but we don't have proportionate religiosity. I say to my sons, those of whom are Hafiz, I say, you know what? Your grandfather, if you had to hear him reading the Quran, his tajweed was so bad you'd laugh at him. You are Hafiz, mashallah. Your tajweed is impeccable, better than mine also. But you don't have the passion for the Quran that your grandfather had. And that's the point I'm making. That's the point I'm making. Our forefathers knew less about the deen, but they were very, very passionate about fulfilling the fundamentals, and they held steadfast onto it. We know much more today. Much more today. Ask me as an alim. When people ask you questions, you can see. They've been on Google. Yeah, 2 nights ago in my Masjid al-Islam in Lens, I'm walking out in the early hours of the morning. Youngster comes to me with his phone. You see, Maulana, witr must not have a tashahud. And I said, who? Here's it here. The ChatGPT gave me this answer, that one gave me that answer, that one gave me. Now I must deconstruct everything for him. I said, why do you have, does he have enough passion to perform the witr like the forefather had? Or is he more worried that for 1400 years everybody was making a mistake and they were not reading the witr right? The Hanafis and the Shafis, according to what he was telling me. But obviously you've got to engage with them, you've got to deconstruct, you can't, become too negative about the whole thing. So there's this decline in religiosity, even though we know more. There's this decline in morality, even though we know more about morals and values. Another threat is we don't have a long-term, multifaceted, comprehensive vision. We're all just working in our silos, rajman bil ghaib, shooting in the dark. We hit the target, we're near the bullseye, we're far from the bullseye, and we carry on, and we see some success. I was reading that Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam planned the hijrah for over 3 years. Every detail, meticulously. Intelligence gathering, investing in individuals, first phase, second phase, there's just the hijrah. We don't have a vision, we don't have a plan. And that's a threat. Also economic empowerment. Like I said early on, over-concentration in certain professions, moving away from trade to professions, materialistic lifestyle. Our organizations are surviving, but not at optimal level. Not at the level that is required, as much as we are a generous community. So we've gone through some of the strengths, some of the weaknesses, some of the threats. What are the opportunities? This is an experienced Muslim community with decades of legacy. We've got identity, strong identity. We've got reputation, both in this country as well as abroad. We've got wealth. By the grace of Allah, we still have religious freedom. We have an abundance of scholars. We still have an abundance of businessmen who are willing to fund religious efforts and initiatives. We have existing infrastructure. We don't have to start from the bottom. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. We just need to diversify. We just need to look at what are the new niche areas. This now coalition politics has given us a new opportunity to wake up from our political slumber and to position ourselves strategically so that we can not only have political clout but politically punch above our weight like we used to historically. Not for selfish reasons, not for materialistic reasons, but to secure the interests of our community and to secure the interests of the broader citizenry. Because wherever Muslims are, they don't lead with selfish values. They lead with the values of ukhrijat linnas. That we serve all of mankind. We serve the entire creation. So really, if you have to balance out our strengths, weaknesses, and the threats and then bring in the opportunity, this Muslim community in South Africa, without exaggeration, has the capacity to lead the ummah. We have led on many fronts and we can lead on many more fronts. We just have to get our act in order. And this is a key period. How we act or we don't act now will set things up positively or negatively for the generations to come, and they will judge us. You see, we can sit here and praise our forebears in that whole long list of strengths of what they achieved. 30 years from now, how will that generation judge us? That at this juncture, what have we done? Especially after this genocide, which ought to have given us a real wake-up call. COVID and then the genocide. If that's not going to wake us up, then what is going to wake us up? To say, you know what, it can't be business as usual. It can't be things as normal. We've got to analyze. We've got to assess. Then we've got to strategize. We've got to visualize and have a vision. In fiqh, they have a very interesting maxim. They say, مَا لَا يُدْرَكُ كُلُّهُ لَا يُتْرَكُ كُلُّهُ. If you can't achieve something in totality, you don't leave it out in totality. So sometimes we say, no, but we can try, but that one won't agree and that one won't join. Start. That's why I very consciously read this ayah in the beginning. إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يُغَيِّرُ مَا بِقَوْمٍ حَتَّى يُغَيِّرُ مَا بِأَنفُسِهِمْ. Things are not going to change globally. Things are not going to change for the ummah. Things are not going to change in this country until I don't change, until you don't change. Yes, we have to change our actions, but we have to change our mindset, our attitude, and our approach. We've got to look at Seerah now from a strategic lens. We've got to look at Quran from a futuristic lens. We've got to look at the capacity that we have and say, right, how can we harness this to maximize impact and to maximize output? The time is now. The time is now. Allah has softened our hearts in the month of Ramadan. Allah had shackled the devil. Allah had given us some degree of self-control. We can go back to where we were the day before Eid, the day after Eid. And that's what we do almost every Ramadan. Or we can say, oh Allah, the time is now. In these last few days, I will supplicate to Allah to help me, to guide me. And I will cement my resolution that we're going to do things differently. In the end, effort is in your control, results are not. There are Anbiya who preached for centuries and they had only one follower. And there was Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam who preached for 23 years. And in every second of the world, someone is saying, Ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah. Results are in the hands of Allah. But like that bird that came to the fire of Ibrahim with a drop of water in its beak and dropped it. And all the animals were laughing and saying, what difference will it make? He said, it will make no difference. But then Allah will ask me on the day of Qiyamah, oh bird, my Khalil was thrown into the fire. What did you do? He said, Allah, I put as much water as I could in my beak and I came and I threw it. The time is now. The change starts with me. The change starts with you. May Allah grant us the tawfiq. Wa sallallahu wa sallam wa baraka ala nabina.